Chapter 58 Malum, Ralpakin. The underground sanctum was now rumbling continuously, as though under orbital bombardment. The Great Khan, outfitted in lightweight plate armor, was 2 meters taller than the children. He leered down at them. "So, you've arrived. Earlier than expected, I confess. Trig Shepminter, action survivor, clairvoyant, and kid hero. Then we have Tenna Honora, deuteragonist, love interest, reluctant fan service girl, and one-time damsel in distress. These two really are the ones I must face? To say the author is losing his touch is an understatement." The cavern rumbled again, causing Trig and Tenna to hold on to each other as they backed away from the Great Khan. Trig noticed, with a sense of terror, that his premonition of dread had still not gone away. He was certain the sudden reappearance of the Great Khan would be the nightmare scenario he was dreading, but apparently not. Malum looked up. "Ah yes, the Song of the Solitaire is here. You've done the thing properly, boy. Well done." Trig was trying to build up his willpower. He knew he would have to fight. Next to him, Tenna was trembling. "What the hell are you talking about?" Trig demanded. Malum stepped off the platform and began slowly walking around the sanctum, looking at each altar and shrine as he spoke. "The truth," Malum said, although in most corners it is known as the Great Lie. Tenna shuddered. Malum ran his fingers along one of the broken gates. "You've been told of my explorations and discoveries, have you not?" Malum said. "I have been to places your underdeveloped minds can scarcely comprehend. I have seen beyond what lies above our reality." "The wellspring of chaos," Tenna breathed. "You saw how the universe was made." "Not just our universe," Malum said. "A multitude of them. All created by a demented god for his own twisted enjoyment. Entire realities living through cycles of violence and misery. I swore an oath that I would overthrow the demon responsible for creating a multiverse of suffering. That work had barely begun when the author moved against me, cast me out, and pronounced my death to the world." Trig's whole body was shaking. It was a struggle to keep his anger in, and the constant bombardment from above was not helping. As the cavern trembled again, Malum went on. "I can see the disbelief in your heart, boy. I felt the same at first. But soon I began to see the telltale signs, evidence of the author's influence." "Evidence?" Tenna repeated. "Oh, please tell me you're not buying this crap," Trig responded. "Our reality was created by a careless author who ignores finer details." Malum was speaking to Tenna, and Trig stepped in front of her to break his line of sight. "His carelessness is so egregious that it is visible to those around him, which makes it doubly so to myself. But why listen to my words, when you can hear them for yourself?" The Great Khan waved a hand lazily above his head. The luminous crystals in the ceiling began to twinkle. Lightstones. The word came into the children's minds, followed by understanding. Lightstones from the grave world of Partoka. The lightstones began to act like stage lights, adjusting their brilliance to create a pair of holograms in the middle of the chamber. The vaguely defined shadow of a man stood in the center of the room, while dozens of shadowy figures surrounded him and spoke in critical tones, their voices produced by telepathy. One by one, the shadows hurled critiques and criticism at a figure they surrounded. Back in Chapter 27, Appia appears as a stowaway on the ship. Her appearance seems off. Appia's appearance needs some narrative help here. Another shadow pushed its way to the front of the crowd. You do realize Arahu was 14 at the time of his death? How did he have a son already? Who was the mother? Or is this another really bad continuity error? And the shadows kept coming. My personal writing pet peeve? Exclamation marks. Action paragraphs that have an exclamation mark at the end of every line are a huge no-no. It's like screaming in the reader's face. The Lightstones washed out the holograms, only to replace them with another display of psionic shadow puppetry. A pair of shadows confronted their target together, while the images of mathematical calculations appeared in the air around them. 2,000 gigajoules would be a fairly small nuke. Roughly 24 Davy Crockett's or 1/30th of a little boy, one shadow said. Easiest solution is to edit the 2,000 gigajoules to 2,000 terajoules, because that would definitely send the base sky high, its companion added, then pressed on. I'm guessing Sutheria is in the region of 10 to the 21st to 10 to the 23rd kilograms. When you said the whole world lurched up 1 meter, it didn't make sense. No asteroid is big or fast enough to do that. Finally, one last shadow appeared. Dear author, you didn't deserve this, and I apologize. But there are so many small issues here that you would undoubtedly have caught them in a revision. The final shadow shook its head in a disappointed way. Why do I feel that the story provides neither any sense of closure nor leaves me with an interesting mystery, but mainly confusion? As the final shadow turned its back on the lone silhouette, a smaller shape appeared. Unlike the others, it was female in appearance. Maybe I can help? A female voice started to say, but Malum waved a hand. The lightstones dimmed, and the visions faded. What you've seen is but a shadow of the enemy I face, Malum told the children. An inept god, an uncaring, clueless creator. A failure of an author who should have put down the pen when he had the chance. He could have saved himself from my reckoning. Instead, here we are. Malum gestured around himself, to the broken gates, to the silver orb on its pedestal, to the children and the lightstones above. And now that I have regained physical form, I can resume my work. The conquest and subjugation of our negligent god. That's madness. What happens after your big fight with a real god? Trig spat. After? Malum raised an eyebrow. After comes the greater work. To cleanse the multiverse of the author's so-called handiwork. To restore peace and order to all peoples, everywhere. Like you brought peace and order to the luminous frontier, Trig said, by enslaving and brainwashing billions of people? There are many who would resist, and they have, Malum said. Not everyone can comprehend the fact that they are being rescued from a fate worse than death. So if I must, I will force bliss and serenity upon those who do not comprehend the nightmare they would leave behind. Out of the corner of his vision, Trig could see an indigo aura surrounding Tenna's body. She was terrified. You keep saying that word, Tenna whispered. You said author. You called Trig a protagonist. You called me a love interest. Are we characters in a story? Are we not real? Her words hung painfully in the cavern. Another deep rumble caused dust to fall from the ceiling. Malum clenched his fists. Yes, he said slowly. Though to be precise, you and I are characters in his story. Malum pointed at Trig, who felt his blood run cold. To him, I am the final antagonist to be vanquished, Malum said. And you, girl, are a sexual object for him to lust over. Tenna was looking at Trig, her face pale, eyes wide. No, Trig breathed. That's not true. That's impossible. Impossible? Says the boy aiming a weapon at me, Malum remarked. For the first time, Trig noticed that he was pointing Appia's pistol at Malum. Tremors ran through the cave, nearly synchronized with his own heartbeat. You're insane, Trig seethed. You're worse than I ever imagined. Trig snatched a glance to his right. Tenna was so stunned by these revelations that she was frozen in place. She was going to be useless for the next few minutes. Screwing up his courage, Trig declared, I'm going to put a stop to you, even if I have to do it alone. Trig pulled the trigger. The magnetic pistol went off with the sound of a cannon blast, and a moment later, Trig's heart skipped a beat. The Gauss round had frozen in place, hovering in midair between Trig and Malum. The great Khan had raised one hand, projecting some kind of energy field that enveloped Trig and the bullet, holding both in place. As he was held by Malum's power, Trig felt very strange. His heartbeat had slowed to a crawl, and it seemed to take several minutes to blink his eyes. The bullet fired from Appia's pistol was actually still moving forward, but it made infinitesimal progress through the air. Malum's face was screwed up in a deep scowl. This is the part where an unlikely ally arrives on the scene and declares, You are not alone, Malum hissed. He stood aside, and Trig suddenly found himself released from Malum's hold. The bullet returned to normal speed and embedded itself in the cave wall with a loud thunk. Less than a second later, there was a loud explosion, and the tunnel entrance was suddenly blasted open. Chunks of rock sailed through the air before crashing onto the sanctum floor. 2 people stormed into the chamber. It was Appia Helford and Radyr Solark. Are you fucking kidding me? Trig shouted. How did Tenna's stalker get in here before anyone else? That's my stalker? Tenna repeated, looking at Radyr. Malum turned around to spot the 2 newcomers. A pair of third-option love interests? Malum said. No, I see what you've done. Telekinetic energy struck Trig and Tenna with the force of a high wind. Both children were thrown across the room and crashed into one of the broken gates. The stone archway crumbled and collapsed. Trig grabbed Tenna and pulled her away from the falling rock. Tenna, Trig yelled, shaking her by the shoulder. What the hell did Malum just do to me? What kind of psionic powers are we dealing with? Trig was certain that Tenna would know something about Malum's powers. She was a living encyclopedia of the Great Khan and his horde. Tenna returned to her senses and quickly proved Trig was right. Time, Tenna panted. He can use psionics to manipulate time. That's how he slowed you down. At the same moment, Malum confronted Appia and Radyr, who were holding blaster rifles at the low ready. Author avatars. I was wondering if I would ever see the day, Malum said. I knew I'd make your acquaintance at some point, Robinson. I take it this girl is your new editor. Where are the children? Appia said in a voice that was clearly not her own. Don't try anything stupid. Tenna's stalker, the man called Radyr Solark, also spoke in a voice that was not his own. There's more of us on the way. Malum clapped his hands in a slow and sarcastic sort of way. You've never inserted yourself into the story so drastically before. Malum was pacing back and forth, never taking his eyes off the 2 interlopers. A desperate ploy, perhaps? Ah, I see. Using the doomed love interests to buy time for another ally to appear. Malum turned his head to look at Trig. Your mentor is still alive, isn't he? Ponico is on his way. Then Malum turned his gaze back to Appia and Radier. Trig was on his feet. He pulled back on the charging handle of Appia's pistol. "We'll take him together," Radier whispered to Appia. "You move in slowly on the left." "No, I'm taking him now!" Appia shouted. She raised her rifle and fired. Trig took aim and squeezed the trigger at the same time. Malum raised his hands to conjure a temporal force field, negating both attacks. "Come on!" Malum growled. A shockwave rippled through the air so quickly that Trig never saw where it came from. All at once, he was tumbling head over heels before crashing into the cave wall. Sharp pain ran up the length of his spine, causing Trig to cry out. As he scrambled back to his feet, Trig could hear Tenna's voice. "Look out!" Part of the ceiling began to crash in, making a noise like a waterfall. Tenna grabbed her helmet and quickly put it on. Trig forgot to grab his own helmet. He was trying to spot Appia and Radier through the cascade of falling rocks. Keeping both arms over his head, Trig stumbled back to Tenna through the rockfall. "We're not going to make it until Ponico gets here," Tenna cried. "What do we do?" Trig looked around. Malum was slowly advancing on Appia and Radier. The former was struggling to extricate herself from the rock slide, while the latter was firing his blaster rifle as quickly as he could pull the trigger. Malum raised one arm and conjured a temporal force field, causing each incoming shot to rapidly age until they were nothing but dust and a strong wind. "We've got to distract Malum somehow," Trig replied, pulling Tenna to her feet. Tenna had been injured at some point. She rested her full weight on Trig's shoulder, unable to stand on her own. Her helmet was cracked, and she pulled it off. I've got an idea," Tenna panted. "What?" Trig asked. "Remember all those Voldemar drama shows we were watching on the flight to Sutheria?" "Not particularly, and is this really the time to bring that up?" Trig said. "We've got to get help from the author." Tenna raised her voice over the sound of gunfire. "He's got to be on our side if Malum wants to fight him." "What author?" Trig repeated. "Did you really believe all that crap Malum was spouting?" The emotional aura around Tenna's body shifted through several colors, purple, blue, and red, before finally settling on gold. "If something really dramatic happens, he can end the episode, or chapter, or scene, or whatever the hell this is supposed to be," Tenna said hurriedly. "That's how it worked on those shows, right? Then the author can do, I don't know, whatever authors do when their characters are in a jam." "Tenna, do you hear yourself?" Trig started to say. But Tenna brushed her long hair out of her face, grabbed Trig with both hands, and interrupted, shouting above the noise of gunfire and rockslide, "Trig Shepminter, you're the hero. You're my hero, and I love you. Please be my Aethera." And she kissed him. Trig felt Tenna's lips on his, and it was the single most wonderful, blissful feeling in the world. Suddenly, there was nothing to see or hear. As far as Trig was concerned, there was only Tenna, and this glorious moment he wanted to last forever. In a sense, Trig's wish did come true. To him, it felt as though the entire universe had come to a full and complete stop.